Back on board a very special edition of Unfiltered. It is episode number 300 in your scorecard. You can jump on board 24/7, 365. It is easy. Apple, Spotify, everywhere you get your podcasts. Of course, artist formerly known as Twitter, X if you will, at Casey Stern. Hop up, tippy top into the bio, and that'll get you over to the YouTube channel. Subscribe, like, get all the content in the videos, please. All that stuff is appreciated. And same with our Instagram, both cases at Unfiltered with Casey Stern. As always, we are presented by our good friends on Bet Online. Bet Online, number one source for your summer sports this season. MLB, golf, NBA, NHL playoffs, and more. All the latest stats, news, and scores are available to follow your favorite teams. Get all the latest odds and lines, including latest team matchups, player props, and odds on just about every sport out there. Head over to the website today to use your mobile device and get into all the action. It is Bet Online where the game starts as we get started here. I want to do something special for 300. I was trying to think of what guest to have and who would be the right guest, and it kind of got all warped in my mind. And then I started to think about something from a different 300, from the most recent UFC 300. And Max Holloway. You know I love combat sports if you follow this show. And it got me thinking about that title and that fight and the BMF. And I wanted to get into what I thought would be fun, opening up a conversation with all of you, because that's what this is. So I need you, and I want to hear from you in the comments. So jump on board, because you're going to have problems with my list, which I'll get into, and I'm sure I'm going to have disagreements with yours. But I'm going to talk to you today about my top 10. I haven't done a list in a while on this show. I've done a bunch of these in the pod, but haven't recently. My top 10 all-time BMFs in my lifetime as a sports fan. Now, I want to, as you start to think about who your list is, I want you to know, no matter who is on your list and no matter who is on my list, these things and all of these choices are obviously subjective to whoever you are, to whatever you think makes a BMF. Now, I will tell you, I'm not coming out here with 10 combat athletes, and I will tell you, I do not even have anyone that has ever fought in mixed martial arts at all, or who currently has or has ever fought for a BMF title. If you want to take it as the 10 toughest athletes you've ever followed or witnessed or watched or rooted for, you can do that. And I want to hear what they are. If you want to take it as the best athletes, and these are the top 10 athletes all time in your lifetime, I want to hear that. You can do that. I want to know who they are. Here is how I looked at this. I looked at a combination of a number of things. Just those who blew my mind with their talent or their toughness or both. And to me, that is what makes you a BMF. It is the highest level of success. It is the highest level of success against adversity, and is the highest level of success with the toughness that you need to travel that road to get there. And it was hard to come up with 10. And I have no idea. I went through the list like I don't even know how many times. And I sat there and crossed the people off. I'm like, how many, what do they call them? Favorable mentions, honorable mentions. Thank you. My own brain, I'm thinking. But honorable mentions, right? How many can I bring up? Because I had so many different names that I had thought of who would fit into the 10 for me. And this is my list, and it is difficult. I wanted to put 10 Islanders on there. I didn't do that. I want to put 10 Knicks on there. I didn't do that. It's not necessarily that kind of list for me, but if it is for you and you're a fan of whatever, you're a New York Jets fan, and you want to tell me Ken O'Brien's number 8 on your list, I ain't going to argue with you. I want to, but I won't. So I'm going to give you my list of 10. I'm also going to hit another couple of things on this show on the back end. I want to say goodbye to my Islanders and also hit one thing on MLB. So that is still to come. And we'll try and hit all sports during this. But I really do want to hear your list. So whether you're getting this on X or Twitter, I want you to reply with your list. If you're getting it on YouTube, I want you to comment. Obviously, like and subscribe. But I want to hear who would be on your list. If you're sitting there and you're getting this and finding it on Apple, Spotify, everywhere you get your podcasts, where most of you are, then follow and find me on Twitter and give me a direct message or send a reply, and I want your list. Or go over to YouTube at Unfiltered with Casey Stern and give me your comments. But here are my top 10, and I'm going to make these, just last thing, kind of story-based. I'm not coming in here and I'll give a few, but I'm not coming in here with a bunch of stats of why. This is personal. This is like, for me, it's like, sharing is caring. And as a sports fan, we've all been through that. That's that passion, that love. And this is a list that brings that about for me. Now, ironically, I've got two people on this list that I worked with. Now, maybe that is what puts them on the list. Maybe that is what pushes them over the edge. And subconsciously, I just don't realize that. But I really don't think so. I just am lucky enough and blessed enough to say, God bless, that I had the pleasure of working with two of these people on the list at 10 and at 9. And at number 10, I have Pedro Martinez. Pedro, long before I worked with him, long before I covered him, which I did when he was with the Red Sox, and I was there every day down that stretch. And you can even find me somewhere in the World Series DVD. I'm the one interviewing David Ortiz when he's hoisting the trophy in that DVD, in that clubhouse for MLB.com, covering it and doing a show way back when 7 people who are watching or listening to this have ever heard of State of the Red Sox Nation. But I had that show and did that. But long before that, and covering him with the Mets and spending 7 years on a set next to him, I was someone who was a student at Boston University. I was somebody who was in Fenway Park, and I was somebody who was watching this man do what he did and watching it as a fan in that city, watching it as a fan from home in what to me are the best back-to-back years that any pitcher has ever had in the history of Major League Baseball. Now, you could argue Bob Gibson, Sandy Koufax, and there are a number of others, Greg Maddux. You could go into a number of stretches that are longer than 2 years, and Pedro's was longer than 2 years, clearly. We're talking about a first ballot Hall of Famer. But his 1999 and 2000 seasons are the best back-to-back seasons, in my opinion. Don't at me, or at me, let me know. In my opinion, in the history of Major League Baseball. 1999 was one of the greatest seasons that has ever been pitched. If you think about the fact that it is in the highlight and the heyday of the steroid era, in the American League East against the Yankees, where there was plenty of that, and everywhere else, that he went 23-4 with an ERA of 2.07, 313 strikeouts, and 37 walks in 200-plus innings. 313 strikeouts and 37 walks. You combine that, and you could use even 98, make it a trio of seasons, with what he did the following year in 2000, and it is in that division, during that time, in that heyday, the best back-to-back seasons, in my opinion, in the history of this sport. But it wasn't just the stats. It was watching this dude, and look, we could talk about the Don Zimmer thing all we want, but watching this dude just not be afraid. I remember sitting there, beginning of working with and having conversations with him and Chef about their at-bats against each other. And your Chef was as tough a dude as you'll ever come across. And me talking about, Pedro. Pedro was, look, this is not a big guy, not a big dude, but he intimidate the hell out of anyone and everyone on that mound. He had that different thing, that aura, that dominance. Now, Roger Clemens had that, but you ever see him stand side to side and the difference in the size of the individuals? It wasn't about the size. It was about, the size of the dog and all that stuff. Pedro Martinez was different level. And for me, that toughness, that bravado, that intimidation factor, the toughness of, for him, his upbringing and where he came from and getting to where he got to and the way he carries himself and has handled his life and all of that and the performance, and to be not only in total, a Hall of Fame career, but the best back-to-back seasons I think ever pitched in this sport during a time that's impossible to do it. We don't talk enough. They should do a 30-30 just on those years. Pedro Martinez, number 10 for me. Number 9, I got Shaquille O'Neal. I remember the first time I met Shaquille O'Neal personally, and it was in the hallway where the green rooms were at Turner, and I had been working in baseball for the postseason there for just a couple of weeks, and it was where it started to cross over with Inside the NBA, which I luckily had the pleasure years later of spending some time on that set. But I remember looking at Shaq and his size and being like, and I'm laughing. And I look, if I had interviewed Randy Johnson, I've been around some big dudes, Carlos Lee, trying to think of some of the larger players that I've talked to and interviewed. Just you forget about large player. It's like, sitting there and it's like he's a planet and you're a crumb. The dominance and size of a man who moved the way that he moved on that court, bringing down backboards from the time at LSU to the Orlando Magic days, all the way through the Lakers and everything else that he accomplished in Miami and everywhere else in his career. The larger than life attitude, the what I mean, I'm just trying to think of the aura. I used aura. I don't know another word, but there's just this thing, this it that Shaq has, and it's not just his size. But you want to talk about a bad dude that you weren't going to get near on a court, you weren't going to move, you weren't going to budge, who was going to go out and eat you alive and spit you out. That was Shaquille O'Neal on that floor. And in the NBA, look, I've covered and watched better players than Shaq, right? Kobe Bryant was a better, and look, Kobe Bryant could have been on this list. He's not, but he could have been. It's a personal list. He could have been for sure. Magic Johnson was my favorite basketball player, non-Nick, growing up. Could have been on this list for sure. Was bad in a total different way in terms of the way that he could move on the floor. Jason Kidd, I think that's some of my favorite basketball players of all time. But there is a different thing that Shaq brought, and an intimidation factor and a size. And you want to talk BMF, who doesn't think of Shaquille O'Neal? For me, I got Shaq at number 9. At number 8, I've got the greatest athlete I've ever watched play any sport as a fan. And that's Bo Jackson. And I could put, Michael or Deion Sanders or others on this list that I've seen. And we could talk about the Jim Browns and others that obviously I know plenty about and have watched video about and seen talk, but never got to watch live or watch during my time period. The Bo Jackson was as bad an MFer as anyone who has ever played in sports. And so much so that because he was such a BMF and had to sit there and play both sports, like, by the way, in 1990, here's one stat I'll pull out. If you're not aware, he's the only one that is ever going to be, ever, in 2 of the 4 major sports and 2 all-star teams in the same year, where he's in the Pro Bowl in 1990 and in the Major League Baseball all-star game. And we all know, especially if he had just stuck to baseball and stayed up the football field, what he could have become. Or even without the baseball and the travel, what he had a better chance to become even with the injuries on the football field. From his time at Auburn to the 99-yard run down the sideline that I was watching live and remember on Monday Night Football when he was a Raider, to his time in Tecmo Bowl when I tried to sit there with the Giants and all my friends would say, you could take your Phil McConkey and shove it when they Bo Jackson me, or for all the Bo Diddley posters that I had, and for everything else that he was larger than life. There was a charisma and a sense that he was the pro star, certainly. Like, if you watch, here's an early bird special. Most of you don't even know what the Pro Star reference is. Go look it up. But the other 2 are on this list. But Bo Jackson, as bad an MFer that has ever lived in sports, in the way that I look at it and the way and I am internalizing this list. And it's funny because if you watch this, like, he's holding his heart. Like, does he know this is sports? But this is like my childhood. This is everything. This is like injected into my veins. I mean, I love sports and I love what it's done for my life as a fan, much more than certainly understanding, obviously, being lucky to work in it for 20 plus years. The Bo Jackson, just as bad a man as there ever was, and the greatest pure athlete that I have ever witnessed play. And I got him at number 8. Number 7, as a New York Giants fan, I get to say that I watched Eli Manning beat him not once, but twice. But I also was down here, cover your ears, Falcons fans. I was here in Atlanta, and I was watching it live on television, but in Atlanta and around Atlanta the next day after 28-3. And that's just one example of Tom Brady and his greatness, because bad and a BMFer, the words do not give enough credence to when you talk about what this dude has done, the greatest quarterback that has ever lived. And one of the guys, look, I had certain names that were on my list that didn't make it. And Barry Sanders and Joe Montana were the 2 that I had at 11 and 12. And Joe Montana, when I was a kid, even though I was a Giant fan, that was bad dude. When I look at bad, when you're sitting there and you're in the biggest spots in the world, you've got ice in your veins and you just don't let anything get to you. And it don't seem to matter. You're not feeling anything except that chance to go out and just dominate and to succeed in the spotlight and in the crunch time and all of that. I mean, who better than Tom Brady? And whether you hate the guy because you're jealous or whatever you want to get mad at, or you want to talk about Deflategate, or you want to talk about on magazines too much or whatever. And I can't wait to watch this Comedy Central roast or Netflix, wherever the roast is coming up here in a few days. But Tom Brady was a bad dude. I got to watch him play, and I watched him play live. My best friend from high school went to Michigan, and I got to see Tom Brady play in Ann Arbor. I got to watch him in a game, which was, I think it was Northwestern they played. It was awesome. And yeah, not then. I mean, then it was cool just being in the big house. But once I realized who Tom Brady was going to become, it was like, oh, I got to watch Tom Brady play at Michigan. But his story, and not caring to been about what in the 6th round or what he was and doing what he did with that opportunity that Mo Lewis and Drew Bledsoe gave him, to everything else he did in his career in big spots. You know, the throw to Wes Welker wasn't perfect. Not every play he ever made was perfect. But when you look at what he did in big spots and was able to do throughout his career, for those of you who are too young, like my son is sitting there and saying, no, Tom Brady, you know, he looked old in his last year. You didn't see Tom Brady when Tom Brady was Tom Brady. And let me tell you something. I got a lot of friends who are sports fans who hate Tom Brady, and I watch them go year after year from, dude, I don't even want to hear it. That guy's on the Patriots. It's Bill Belichick, or, you know, he's being overrated, or forget it. If it was this guy or that guy, we wouldn't be paying attention. Or don't tell me he's not even as good as Peyton Manning, or he know Joe Montana, or he know whoever it is for you. And they all went by the wayside. And I don't know anyone who is a real football fan that does not think Tom Brady was the greatest quarterback that has ever lived. Number 7. Number 6 is probably the most important one on this list to me. And I kind of cheated a little bit because I said I would do a list on my lifetime. And this is in my lifetime, even though I was 2. It became a much bigger part of my life way after it. It became a bigger part of my life when I got a plaque that I had as a small kid that stayed in my room, and then learned about a picture of Jim Craig with that flag. It became a bigger part of me when I watched Miracle for the first of 7 million times, and then began to watch every documentary and learn about it. It became a bigger deal for me when I don't have many jerseys still left in a closet that's in the next room, but Mike Eruzione's jersey and wearing 21, another BU guy, is certainly one of those. And there is nobody better in my lifetime than that group in 1980 on that Miracle on Ice. What these guys did against all the odds and the challenges against them, and in the fact of, for those who somehow have been in a closet, if you do not know this story, and this podcast does anything for you, maybe it'll be the fact that you go and seek out these stories in the documentary and the movie Miracle and what happened if you are young. And I know younger people watch and listen to me, and I appreciate that. But this group and what they accomplished is the greatest feat in the history of American sports. There's, number 1 on this list is arguably the greatest sports performer and athlete of all time, and will not be able to ever, to me, eclipse in terms of moments in this country that "Do You Believe in Miracles? Yes" from Al Michaels in 1980. What that team did at a time that it did it in this country, and with the odds stacked against them, a bunch of kids and misfits thrown together to go beat a team that hadn't lost in decades, team that had beaten the NHL All-Stars, team that had whooped our asses in that 80 Olympic team just, a couple of days before the opening ceremonies in Lake Placid. My favorite sports movie is The Natural. I've talked about this before in a previous podcast. And it's sometimes a controversial pick because a lot of people have better baseball movies. And there are other, look, I love The Sandlot. I love Field of Dreams. I love Bull Durham. I'm not going to 8 Men Out. I'm not going to name now. I'm starting to name them. But every, baseball movie, Major League, and yada, yada, whatever, right? Every movie that everybody likes. But what is it about The Natural for me? I love to believe. I am a dreamer. I am a hopeless romantic as a human and as a sports fan. And I love to believe in good. And I love to believe in the impossible. And I love to believe that things that are impossible can be possible. And that's why I loved Roy Hobbs and I loved Wonder Boy and that bat and that stroke of lightning in that movie, The Natural. This is like a movie, and it is. Miracle's a movie, but it's not a movie. It's real life. And you can't be a group of badder BMFers than that team in 1980. And I got the Miracle on Ice at number 6. Now, this transition is going to be tough because we're going from the most pure thing you possibly can mention on this list or any of yours in sports. And again, want to hear from you, want to hear your list. Please bring them to me. To maybe the least pure thing I can mention on this or any list, but he's at number 5 because he's got 7 MVPs, 14 All-Stars. He walked 2,500 times, almost 700 of them intentionally, 700 plus homers. And to me is the greatest baseball player that I have ever seen. And more importantly, I can tell you, and I've talked about this in previous pods, in 20 years covering baseball, there wasn't a player that played against or with Barry Bonds. And there were plenty I talked to that told me off the record and off the air they didn't like him. There were plenty that told me they thought he was guilty. There were plenty that told me they were pissed off that he had cheated. There wasn't a single one when I asked who's the greatest player you've ever played with or against that said any name other than Barry Bonds. And that is the truth. Not one said Ken Griffey Jr., who was on everybody's list. Not one said A-Rod, although we eventually know why. Not one said anyone else. Barry Bonds is the greatest baseball player I have ever seen. The greatest hitter I have ever seen. And that's with a guy who watched Tony Gwynn and Wade Boggs and a million others who were unbelievable artists with that bat. What Barry Bonds could do and the patience that he had at the plate and the fact that literally he would get a pitch a week and still do what he was doing, I don't think we can ever give enough credit to how unbelievably amazing and bad and what a BMFer this guy was. And by the way, the attitude and everything about him probably helps in some ways with this kind of a category, even if it's not in the great ways. And I'm talking about swag and arrogance and attitude with the media and all those other things that maybe people didn't like. And maybe in addition to all the other stuff kept him out of the Hall of Fame. But should Barry Bonds be in the Hall of Fame? Yeah. Barry Bonds is the best player of my lifetime. He may be the greatest player ever. Barry Bonds is number 5 for me. Number 4 is the scariest, arguably on this. Well, number 3 is going to be the scariest. Number 4 is the scariest in any of the 4 major sports that I have ever seen play. And I just happened to be a fan of the team he played for in a time where I was growing as a sports fan and it was becoming such an important part of my life. And number 4 is Lawrence Taylor, the greatest defensive player that has ever lived. He made the biggest impact of any defensive player that has ever lived. Now, if you don't know that he's a bad MFer, or you don't know just how great Lawrence Taylor is, or I say LT to you, and I always laugh because people, JT is now Justin Timberlake. To me, it's James Taylor because that's how I grew up listening. Thank you, Mom. Right? But if LT is LaDainian Tomlinson to you, which is fine, then maybe you need to go look something up again here. After you get done with 1980, go look up Lawrence Taylor. Or go look up the highlights and go look at, if you could watch it again, Joe Theismann. Or all of them against Ron Jaworski. Or Randall Cunningham. Or Mark Rippon. Or how many others that you want to pick. At a time where, in football, you think about the Dick Buckuses in the world and I think Reggie White. And there are so many that are great defenders all time, right? Lawrence Taylor is the most impactful defensive player of all time, was the meanest defensive player of all time, was the scariest to opposing offenses and quarterbacks of all time, and I don't even know if it's close. The guy looked like he would have eaten glass, and I don't know if Bill Parcells would admit it, but he might be the one guy even Angry Bill might have been afraid of. Just a bad dude, and growing up a Giant fan during that time was just such a cool thing to watch 56 do his thing. I got Lawrence Taylor at number 4. Top 10 BMFs of my lifetime, 3 left. Number 3, the only combat sports athlete on this list. And the only BMFer in the typical way, even well before he was biting ears and way before he's about to fight Jake Paul at 57 years old or whatever it is. Mike Tyson's at number 3. I remember sitting with my grandfather and watching as a kid, staying up late to watch the fights. I remember the Spinks fight. I remember that. And it was like a minute and a half, I think it lasted. I remember that this was going to be the challenge. This was going to be the one. Is it Michael Spinks, I think? This is going to be the one, right? And for those who don't remember the Tyson days, there are some great clips you could watch on YouTube where they've got like just literally like, 30 minutes and they're like all his fights like put together. There's some more homework for you. Go watch those because this dude was just unfreaking believable. Not the tallest guy, but when he would charge forward, like in Mike Tyson's Punch Out, which by the way makes you pretty bad too, he was so powerful and so scary. And at the time looked to be the greatest knockout artist that had ever lived. At a time where boxing was all that lived. There was no UFC. And if boxing was boxing then, now, and if Mike Tyson was around and was that Mike Tyson now, the UFC would have somebody to run with them because Mike Tyson was a sport all to himself. Now, not everything he did off the field in this case or outside of the ring was great, and we understand that. He's rehabilitated a lot of parts of his life. People still don't like him because of stuff that he's done, and I'm not here for any of that. Not even here to tell you that because he bit a guy's ear off, although that doesn't hurt the BMF mentality, or that at 57 he still wants to fight, and go look at the way the guy's training, and that don't hurt it either. But Mike Tyson was the baddest of the bad. And if you're talking about a combat sports element, no offense to Max Holloway, who'll be the first to tell you, that's the BMF. Number 2 and number 1 are the 2 greatest sports athletes of my lifetime. I don't say that as an opinion. I don't say it as a question. Now, I think you could put number 2 as number 1, although it wouldn't be done mostly in this country, and I'm not going to do it here because for me, it doesn't play out that way mentally for me either. The Wayne Gretzky at number 2 is the answer to this question in my lifetime and always has been. When anyone asks me, who's the greatest in any sport, if you were to determine it by the difference between that player and every other player who played the sport at the same time, Michael Jordan had, now look, I'm not saying that whether it's Mario Lemieux, who'd be the only one close, or you want to talk about the Luc Robitailles, or you want to get into, Marc Messier, who's on his own team for a lot of that time, or whoever else you want to get, Ray Bourque, who I loved, or anybody else, Patrick Waugh, you want to get into. Michael Jordan had more to deal with. Tom Brady had Peyton Manning and others, and Aaron Rodgers, and more to deal with. Wayne Gretzky had those to deal with too, but it wasn't even close. Wayne Gretzky is not only the greatest hockey player that has ever lived, he is so far better than anyone else is. It's crazy. How crazy? The fact that, to me, forget about the fact that he had 212 points in a season, but the fact that over his career he's got more assists than anyone else has points. And if you don't like hockey, let me explain this to you. A goal is a point. An assist is a point. Combined are your points. So if you won 1 goal and 4 assists, you have 5 points. You have 3 goals and 2 assists, you have 5 points. Wayne Gretzky has more assists than anyone else in hockey has ever had points. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. I got Wayne Gretzky at number 2. And number 1, I've got Michael Jordan. Now, I'm a Knick fan, and I've talked about that plenty on this podcast. That may play into some of this because when you're a Knick fan, you realize what a BMF for Michael Jordan was because he used to destroy my hopes and dreams on a yearly basis. And then the one year he was out and decided to try and play baseball, thank you. And Tony Kukoc and Scottie Pippen, thank you. And some refereeing, but that's a whole nother thing. The Knicks got to, seemingly get to where they almost won. And if John Starks would have had a better game, not 2 for 17 or hit a shot, I love John Starks at the end of game 6 in the corner, it might have been a different story against the Rockets. Michael Jordan was and is the most dominant, baddest man that has ever played in any sport. See, because you can argue whether or not LeBron was better in terms of look, size and ability. And even though Michael Jordan, 1987, 88, not only scored 35 a game, but was Defensive Player of the Year. But you want to talk about what LeBron could do, way he could dish, his size, ability to handle it, run the floor, and do different things than Michael could do. And LeBron probably could score a lot more points. And certainly, if he was better as a free throw shooter, he could have, right? And all those things. But he wasn't as bad as Mike. Now, Kobe had that in him. LeBron doesn't, not to that level. I don't think there's anyone that thinks he does have it to that level because no one has it to that level. If LeBron had Isaiah Thomas's, speaking of people I work with, Zeke's mentality, right, and that kind of dog in him, then maybe combine the two and they would have trumped Jordan. But Michael Jordan was as bad as they come. He'd stick out his tongue, laugh in your face. He was so bad, he created fake rivalries just to piss himself off to dominate. If you haven't seen the 30 for 30, go watch it. If you haven't watched The Last Dance, go take a look. Because this dude was a different level of bad. He was a different level of serious on his own teammates, on the opposing team, and on himself. And that's how he got to the level he got. Michael Jordan, number one on my list. I want yours. I want your comments. I want your thoughts. What kind of list you putting together? Who are your BMFs? How you doing it? Bring it to me. Apple, Spotify, everywhere you get your podcast. I want you to get on in, get on Twitter, whether it's a DM, direct message, follow, reply, get into the YouTube, Unfiltered with Casey Stern. Stop this right now. Go pull over to the side of the road and get in there. Subscribe to the channel, like, and then get in the comment on this video, which I'll post there, and give me your list. At 10, I got Pedro. 9, I got Shaq. 8, I got Bo Jackson. 7, Tom Brady. 6, the 80 Miracle on Ice U.S. Olympic team. Number 5, Barry Bonds. Number 4, Lawrence Taylor. Number 3, Mike Tyson. Number 2, Wayne Gretzky. Number 1, Michael Jordan. A couple of quick notes at the end here. Not going to do a whole pod on the Islanders because it'll just depress me. So I'm not going to do it. So if you came for that, and I'll put the Isles in the comments so at least you can know, or in the headline that you can know it's on here, I'll just say this. The way they lost and blowing it in 8 seconds, the way that they did, was just typical. The fact that you could look back at this series and say, well, what if they didn't blow the 3-goal lead in game 2? And what if those 8 seconds don't disappear? Was the microcosm of the whole season, where you could talk about what if they could play well in shootouts, and you could talk about what if they didn't blow all those leads, yada, yada, et cetera, on down the line, because that is what this team did to us for the entirety of a year and has done to us how many years in a row. The difference is that you feel like, okay, they screwed up with Barry Trotz, letting him walk, and it was a huge mistake. Lane Lambert wasn't the guy, but Patrick was here. Now, better draw for players coming in, better feeling moving forward, maximize, squeeze more out of the orange, but it's all about now what Lou does with this roster, a roster that will say goodbye and thank you for all your time. And I mean that, Cal Clutterbuck, and thank you for all your time, Matt Martin, and others. And I expect a couple of trades where they will move others too. Maybe even 1 or 2 that hurt because they've got Nelson and Palmieri coming off a big year. And you've got others in their last year of their contract where they're going to free up some money somewhere if they're going to make changes. And who knows where they're going to be. It was a growth year for Noah Dobson. It was a bad year for Sorokin. He'll be fine, and he's locked in seemingly forever. The fact I got to watch Pierre Engvall play another 6 years of this team makes me want to vomit. But if you're an Islander fan, this is about what they do with the roster from here. No one should be surprised what happened in Carolina. Last thing. MLB is now going to, a couple of days ago it came out, they've admitted Nike screwed up. They're going to, the memo got to the players, got leaked, and all of a sudden now they're going to do this and they're going to get it ready by the beginning of the 2025 season. Why? We're in 2024. Now, I don't make fabric for a living nor clothing. You ever seen what I wear? You know that. But I ask you this. Doesn't it seem like if they already have all the measurements, they already have all the names and numbers, they already had all the jerseys last year, they already have most of these players' information, doesn't it seem like we could have this, and I don't know, by the All-Star break at the latest? Why the hell are we waiting until next year? It's not like they have to find a new algorithm. We already know. They just got to go back to the way it was. It's like a video game. You don't like this year's version of NHL, and by the way, I didn't. Go play the last one and update your own roster. Can't they do that here? Makes no sense to me. You make sense to me. This makes sense to me, and I appreciate you. Thank you for being here. 300 episodes deep. We'll continue on board. Unfiltered